You know, we as bass anglers love fishing shallow. Right here in front of us, we got a laydown tree right here. We got some bushes, we got some stumps. Fishing shallow is fun. You know, there's top water, you can flip and pitch, you can throw a reaction bait. And most of the time, bass in our bodies of water spend at least a portion of their year up shallow, so it's a great way to catch them. But in this video, we're gonna talk about why boat positioning, whether you're in a bass boat, a john boat, a kayak, or anything in between, your boat positioning and making mistakes with that is costing you fish. My name's Tyler, and let's talk about it. How's it going, everybody, and welcome back to Tyler's Real Fishing. On this channel, my goal is to help you guys become better bass anglers and catch more fish with every single video that I make. So hit that subscribe button, drop a comment below if you enjoyed this video, and leave a like. I know that's the classic YouTuber thing to say, but it really helps the channel and boosts the engagement. I feel like bass fishing tips are very well covered on the internet, and I think I do a great job here on this channel. But what I don't feel like is covered is some of the more technical things that you might not think about when you're fishing. You might launch your boat, you launch your kayak, you head to the bank, and you think, I'm gonna throw this lure. Now, I don't know how to fish it, so I'm gonna look it up on YouTube, and you find tons of instructionals to fish certain lures. But one mistake that you could be making if you are fishing on a body of water, whether it's a pond, a river, a big lake, a small lake, a reservoir, is that they have their boat positioning wrong when it comes to fishing shallow cover. So in this video, we're gonna talk about some of the mistakes I see anglers make, and of course, how to fix them when it comes to positioning your watercraft, your kayak, your john boat, your bass boat on your body of water to catch more fish. Let's start with location number one, and that is boat docks. One of my favorite pieces of structure to fish in my bass boat is going to be boat docks. You guys see it, I fish them all around the country, and there's tons of different types. There's floating, there is ones that are cemented into the bottom by poles, there are ones that are really shallow, and ones that are sitting over 100+ feet of water, depending on your lake, but they all hold fish. So when it comes to boat positioning, what I do is I run a U-shaped pattern around the dock. So I'm gonna start usually, for me, on, if you're looking at the dock, the left side of the dock, work my way around the dock in a U shape to the right. And the reasoning for that is because I want to find out what water depth these fish are in. Most docks out there, at least that I can think of, start with the walkway up to the dock being the shallowest section, and then out here at the end being the deepest section. And so your bass on a certain day are going to be in some depth of water. Whether they are suspended on the end of the dock or they are sitting on the bottom way up shallow underneath those stairs or that walkway that people use to get onto their dock, the bass are going to be somewhere. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna start by making casts, you know, a jig, my favorite thing to throw around docks. As long as it's shallow enough, I'm throwing a jig. That means 15, 20 feet of water or less. I'm gonna start by making casts on the left side of the dock here. If I don't get any bites, I'm gonna work my way out to the deep. And if I don't get any bites there, I'm gonna work my way back shallow on the right side. By doing this U-shaped pattern, in my experience, you have the best chance at quickly finding where those fish are. And then, like I said, you wanna find that area, you wanna find that location, that angle, and then replicate it. So let's say that I work my way here with my boat, you know, to the walkway section. I skip under the walkway and I catch a fish. If that's the case, I'm not gonna spend any time the rest of the day fishing any of the ends of docks. I'm just gonna come up to a dock, head straight to the walkway, fish this side of it, do that U-shaped or circular shaped motion to the other side, fish the walkway from the other direction, and then head to the next dock. I'm not gonna spend any time on the slips. I'm not gonna spend any time on the edge of the dock. You've just gotta find exactly where those fish are sitting and replicate it throughout the rest of the day. Now, one thing that's very crucial about fishing docks is that you make the best presentation possible. Whether it's the best skip, the most quiet flip, or the longest skip underneath the dock to get farther than anybody else has gone, you want a really good presentation. And so for me, I'm gonna work docks in a, well, I guess if I'm talking about the U shape or the circle, it would be a counterclockwise motion. Like I said, I'm gonna start from the left side of the dock to me, I'm gonna go around this way, and the reasoning for that is because I wanna do a right-handed roll cast. That's the best way that I have found for me to get a good presentation into that dock is by fishing it in that direction. If you use a left-handed bait caster and you like skipping it the other way, maybe working docks the other way is going to be most beneficial for you. And so I found so many times that I pull up to a dock, I start fishing it the wrong way. I get a bite, I've got to set the hook backwards or I can't quite get a good flip in there. So I've just learned, if I'm going to fish docks, I'm going to fish them the way that's most effective for me, the most efficient, and that is in this direction right here, so I can give those fish a beautiful skip and roll cast. Now, how far away should you be from the dock? In my experience, the farthest you possibly can while still getting the longest good skip. If you're a beginner angler, you're probably gonna have to be a little bit closer to the dock to have a better chance of getting your lure underneath there. But for me, it's a good, I would say, boat length to 2 boat lengths is how far away I want to be from that dock. If I'm in dirtier water, I can afford to be a little bit closer. If I'm in clear water, I'm gonna try to be as far away as I possibly can, because those fish, especially if you're on a pressured body of water, they see tons of lures. If they see another boat coming by, they hear the trolling motor noise. I have physically seen on my graph, I come around a dock, I skip in there, and the fish that I saw on my graph underneath that dock is already going further deep into that dock because it's used to seeing boats, it's used to seeing lures. So that is exactly how you fish a boat dock, boat positioning wise. I say we move on to situation number 2, which is fishing shallow grass. So when it comes to boat positioning when fishing grass, there really is no standard. You know, when I fish docks, like I talked about, I do a more U-shaped or circular shaped pattern, always go one direction for my casting strength. But when I'm fishing grass like I have in front of me right here, we kind of got a grass flat, we got a grass edge, we got some reeds, some clumps of grass over there. There's not really a standard of where your boat should be. But there's one rule that I go by, and that is the depth of the grass, or the depth of the water that the grass is in. The deeper the water is the grass is growing in, the closer your boat can be to where you are making your cast and hopefully catching fish. So the first thing that pops into my mind is when I'm flipping matted milfoil or just scattered grass in Minnesota, I can be literally 5 feet from the fish that I'm flipping towards because that water is deeper, those fish feel more secure, and they might not hear me if I'm being nice and stealthy, hear my boat, and especially in a john boat or a kayak. But if I'm in a situation like I am today, this water here is 2 feet deep. The grass is not really a hard edge per se. It's more just kind of an expansive flat. This is when you have to make longer casts at those fish. So as y'all can see from the drone shot right here, I'm gonna put an arrow on where that grass line is. That's where I'm going to focus the majority of my time when I first get to a grassy area. And so boat positioning wise, I'm going to parallel that grass edge. If I don't know where the fish are, I'm gonna take a reaction bait, a soft plastic jerk bait like the Strike King caffeine shad right here, and I'm going to cast parallel to the edge. You can't do that if the grass edge is like this and you're casting straight at the edge. You have to get your boat, your watercraft this way and cast down the grass edge, and that gives you the best chance of catching fish. But let's say that you pull out a topwater frog, you make a cast way deep in there, and you get a bite where the grass is really, really shallow, almost all the way up against the bank. Then, even though your boat is going to be really, really close to that edge, the bite you got was way beyond the edge into the thick of the grass, and so you can afford to get your boat closer to that grass. But really, it's all about finding where those fish are. If the water is shallow, you want to be farther away from your cast, and if the water is deep, you can afford to be a little bit closer. So that is it for boat positioning when talking about shallow grass. Let's talk about one more shallow green substance, and that is lily pads. In my opinion, there is no better looking bass structure out there than lily pads. I mean, I'm looking in front of me right now and I think there's gotta be bass in these. And really anywhere I travel around the country, there are. Lily pads are a great place to find bass, and in my experience, a swim jig and a topwater frog, especially topwater frog, are the best ways to catch them. But where do you position your boat? Well, the first thing I want to say is that there's many different types of lily pads. There's little tiny dollar pads, even tinier ones, smaller than dollar pads. There's ones that are like this one here, 2.5 feet wide, really all different types and varieties of lily pads, and they grow in different styles of groupings. So here we have big lily pad field that goes a good 75 yards from the bank up there all the way out here, but the water depth doesn't really change, which is the reason why these lily pads are able to grow from the bank all the way out here. And so in this scenario, the bass could technically be anywhere. They could be here on the edge of the lily pads, they could be somewhere in the middle, they could be all the way up against the bank because the water depth doesn't change throughout it. But that's not the case with all lily pads. Sometimes you're gonna have individual clumps, or maybe you're fishing a big open flat. I think about Florida a lot when I see this, is that your water depth in most of the lake is a little bit too deep for lily pads to plant roots and grow, except in little tiny isolated hump areas. And so you're gonna find areas, of course, the water is shallower. And so because of that shallower water, you have little patches of lily pads that don't resemble a field. They more resemble what I would call like reed patches or the shallow grass we just talked about. And that's more of a target situation where your boat's gonna be a full cast length away. But in this situation, the bass could be anywhere. And so you have to start weaving your way in and out. That's kind of the position that I take, is I start here on the edge, I make long casts for 3 to 4 minutes to the edge, and then I slowly work my boat into those pads, make really long casts even shallower. Then I get the boat almost all the way to the bank, and I make casts out deep. And as soon as I get a bite somewhere in this entire stretch, I know exactly where those fish are going to be throughout the rest of it, most likely. And so I'm gonna position my boat to make a long cast toward that. I have not had a whole lot of success fishing close to the boat around lily pads. I prefer to make a really long cast, especially with the 2 lures that I throw, topwater frog and the swim jig. But the biggest thing I want to say about boat positioning around lily pads is that you can't be afraid to get up in there. I see so many people that just sit on the outside, make casts in there. If you got a good enough trolling motor and your boat is not a deep V, old-fashioned walleye boat, you can get up in the shallow stuff and you'll eventually find where those bass are. So that is lily pads. I say we move on to talk about laydowns. Let's talk about laydown logs. We've got them all around the country. I don't care what type of lake you're in. I don't care if you've got trees on your bank naturally or not. Somehow, trees end up laying on their sides on the side of our lakes. And so it's a great place to catch fish, especially when you are fishing shallow. Now, the biggest thing that I'm gonna say for boat positioning when it comes to laydown logs is that you wanna keep your boat as far away as possible to make a roll cast or a long flip to before you start moving your boat in. And so, as you can see, we have a laydown in front of us right here. I'm a good roll cast distance away from that brush pile, but I'm not quite far enough away. And the reasoning for that is because laydown logs oftentimes are a full-size tree like this. They have branches that extend farther into and farther deeper in the water than you even think. And so I'm gonna actually back the boat away. So now we are farther away from this laydown. So if we were just beginning to fish it, I'd wanna be out here. I'd wanna make a full cast to the edge just to make sure that there's not any branches that are sticking out further than I can see. I'm feeling around. Doesn't seem like at least the area that I made a cast. Oh, no, never mind. There was a branch right there. And if I had come up to that laydown too quickly, gotten too close, there's another one right there. I would have no clue that this tree sticks out. I mean, I'm a good 25 feet from beyond where I can see it enter into the water. So I'm gonna roll cast 3 or 4 times around the edge, the outside, where you wouldn't imagine any branches would be. Once I have either caught a fish or not caught a fish, I'm gonna start slowly moving my boat in. If you got power poles, use them because it is very advantageous to be quiet with your boat positioning around these things. And to me, I wanna have the boat positioned to where I can make the most accurate flip the first time. So if I'm not great at using my left hand to flip, or I'm not great at using certain angles, I wanna get the boat to exactly where I can have the best flip possible. And I'm gonna start working my way in. So I'm gonna work with this jig here, kind of on the outside branches. Give it a few flips around the outside, and then the majority of the time, your biggest fish on a laydown branch is going to be the place where you think it's impossible to get a fish out from. So when you hook a fish and you say, uh-oh, how am I gonna land this fish? That's where those big ones are gonna be. So right there in the heart of the branches, sometimes you gotta flip over a few branches to get there. That is where you're most likely gonna find your biggest bass. And like I said, you wanna take it slow. You don't wanna head straight to the heart of the laydown to begin. You wanna begin on the outsides, then slowly move your way in. And like I said at the beginning of the video, you wanna find an angle and then replicate it. You wanna find an area and then replicate it. So if you catch a few fish as you begin to fish laydown logs on the edge of them, it's not really worth your time the rest of the day unless things change to fish the insides. So you wanna find exactly where those fish are and replicate it. And that's why I love fishing the outside to the inside as opposed to the other way around. Now, staying in the same vein as timber, we're gonna talk about boat positioning for standing timber. Now, standing timber is a really interesting feature in a lot of lakes out there because, as you can tell by this tree in front of me right here, there's not really a whole lot of structure and cover on these trees. And so when it comes to fishing these things, in most scenarios, no matter where I am in the country, Lake Fork, here at Table Rock Lake, anywhere that has standing timber, I'm not usually flipping a jig, a worm, a Texas rig against the base of the tree because they don't really have a whole lot of stuff to sit on here at the base. Whether it's at the top or the bottom, these standing timber trees are kind of just like stalks shooting straight up. And so when you have a field of timber like we have in front of us, where do you position your boat? In my experience, the best place to position your boat and thus make casts towards is going to be wherever the creek channel is. So you might wonder, how did all these trees get here? Well, before they flooded your lakes, it used to be one big river channel out towards the main section of your lake, and then a bunch of tiny creeks that fed into that main river. So when they flood the water, water rises, the creeks become wider, become like creek arms, kind of lakes in themselves, and all those trees get flooded. And so you want to position your boat where that old creek channel is, because bass are still going to use that deepest section where that creek channel drops off to feed and to move. And so how can you find that? In a field full of trees, how can you find the creek channel? Well, first, if you have a topographic map, Navionics, Humminbird, whatever, you can use that to find the creek channel because it'll most likely be marked. And if not, the best way to find, as I'll show here on the drone clip, is that you look for areas where the trees are kind of following the bank line. So the arrows you're seeing right there on the screen are exactly where the creek channel goes, and that is where I want to position my boat and thus make casts. Best lures for this area I found are a deep crankbait, surprisingly. You can throw a deep crankbait around trees like this, a big worm, and a Carolina rig. Really not a whole lot else you can do. I know that fish do tend, especially in cedar trees, to suspend up in the top of them, but unless you have really fancy electronics and a lot of skill and placement to get your lures exactly where they need to go, those suspended fish are very difficult to catch. So it's best that you stick to the creek channel, what's down there on the bottom, because of course, these trees used to have branches, they've all fallen, and they are now down there on the bottom, which creates more habitat for fish. So that is how you position your boat on standing timber.
You, my friend, have caught the first bass.
Well, thank you all so much for watching this video. I hope that you enjoyed and learned something about how to become a better bass angler. Boat positioning is crucial to catching fish, especially with the more anglers that are on the water. It's going to be so important that you put your boat, whether it's a bass boat, kayak, john boat, in the right place to make the right cast. Now, if you enjoyed this video, I know I talked about grass a little bit in this video. I've got a video that I made a few months ago talking about the best lures for grassy situations. So grassy lakes, grassy ponds, grassy rivers. If you want to know the best lures for that, click up here in this corner. I'll have a box pop up right here with that video. With that said, thank you guys so much for watching. We'll see you next time right here on TRF.